This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet.
Aloha, and welcome to the monthly public presentation of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Since 1990, the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii has been following our mission of promoting human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education, as we've grown to become one of the largest all-volunteer nonprofit vegetarian societies in the nation. We are proud to say that we are celebrating our 25th birthday this year. It's now time for our special guest. We are so delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Antonia Demas. Antonia Demas's PhD is in education, nutrition, and anthropology, which she earned from Cornell University. She has worked in various capacities for over 40 years, developing food-based curriculums and teaching food studies in a variety of educational settings with people of diverse ages, as well as ethnic and socio-economic backgrounds. Because of her excitement about the learning and health improvements that occur among children when they have positive, sensory-based, hands-on experience with food, she has devoted herself to engaging in research to document this observation scientifically. Her dissertation won 2 national awards for excellence in creativity. Dr. Dimas is the founder and director of the Food Studies Institute based in Trumansburg, New York, a nonprofit devoted to improving the long-term health and education of children and their families. Her curriculum, Food is Elementary, has been used successfully in more than 3,000 schools in 35 states. She consults throughout the United States and abroad and trains and certifies teachers as food educators. We're so delighted to say that Dr. Demas's visit this time to Hawaii has been sponsored by Catherine Orr. You should stand up. She's a local artist and author of a wonderful, healthy, plant-based picture book for kids called The Doctors in Millie's Suitcase. And I urge you to read it. It's a really good one. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Antonia Demas.
Thank you so much, and oh boy, this is why I love Hawaii so much, one of the many reasons. Thank you.
So good to see you.
It's really a pleasure to be back here, and I too give great thanks to Catherine Orr for bringing me over here. We're hoping that as an outcome of this trip that we can set something up in Hawaii so Hawaii can be the first state in the country that has a food literacy educator in every public school. You're an island and you're very vulnerable, and I hope that what I show you in some of these slides about what's possible in terms of getting a real prevention program in place where kids will want to eat healthy foods and will be taught about it with their peers in the classroom is very possible, and it's really, in my view, our only hope to reverse all these dangerous diet-related diseases. So I'm going to give you some background about the work that I've done over the course of more than 40 years. And if you have any questions when I'm speaking, please feel free to ask them, because you forget sometimes at the very end. My curriculum is called Food is Elementary. It uses food to teach science, math, social studies, art, music, literature. I use food as a hands-on sensory vehicle to teach all those subjects. And it's based on this quote, "Food is good to think." This was a quote from an anthropologist, which is really the educational framework of the work that I do. I put food in the curriculum in a very fun way, let the kids do experiments with it, taste it. They do all kinds of really fun, interesting projects with food, and they become familiar with it. Once they become familiar with it, then they accept it. They're no longer afraid to sample different healthy foods. Can you read these quotes, or do you want me to read them? Because I have, should I read them? I try to bring the kids' voice into my work whenever I can, and I have hundreds of anecdotal stories about how kids really are not the problem. It's adult perception of kids that is the issue. So the kids all keep journals, and they write down their true feelings in the journals. And so I just want to share some of them with you, and they'll be throughout this. This is from a kid. "Food is Elementary is a great program. I went from hating fruits and veggies to absolutely loving them. My 3 reasons I think we should keep Food is Elementary going is they teached me," and I'm not going to correct the grammar, "many things. I brought in very tasty food, and they helped me start eating fruits and veggies." So this is a completely plant-based curriculum, and the kids are typically exposed to up to 100 different raw whole foods that they've never had before. And I'll go through this presentation and really show you the technique that really works. I get calls all the time from people saying, "Oh, my toddler will only eat junk food. Woe is me, what should I do?" And I say, well, does your toddler get in the car and drive to the store to buy the junk foods? You're the gatekeeper of your house, of your kitchen, and what you have in your house and your attitude towards healthy foods is going to greatly influence your baby. So how many of you have heard adults say to children, "Kids hate veggies. You're a kid. I know you're not going to like it. It's a vegetable." We use language that really biases our kids against eating healthy foods. We make faces when we feed them spinach, when they're infants, when we're introducing it. So we really need to be aware of how food is introduced to kids and what sort of foods are in the house. Now, this picture is of my daughter when she was less than a year old. She is now in her upper 30s, and she's a food literacy educator in Baltimore, Maryland. The first school, beginning in 2004, in the United States, I believe, and Baltimore is not as peaceful and serene as Hawaii is in many ways. There's a high rate of poverty, and there are a lot of issues in Baltimore, but it's the first school that I'm aware of that has a public school that has paid a full-time food literacy educator to teach the kids every day gardening, nutrition, and cooking. And she's been doing it since 2004. So my feeling is if it can happen in Baltimore, it should be able to happen in Hawaii. And we need to get a group of people together to make it happen, because it's not only our physical health, it's the health of the planet that's being greatly affected by this. We know the statistics are pretty alarming of the diet-related diseases. Now, these are the percent that are likely avoidable. And you can see cancer, stroke, heart disease, and diabetes. There are really high percentages of diseases that are real killers that we can prevent through our lifestyle. Okay, and here's national prevalence of lifestyle-related health risk. And when you look at these figures, the number one issue is poor diet, higher than smoking, cholesterol, etc. So diet is something that really puts us at a huge risk, and we have control over it if we choose to. This is a study I did in Baltimore a number of years ago with a student from Johns Hopkins, and she was studying food as elementary. It was my curriculum, food as elementary, was in a number of schools at the time, and she was very curious to do a study on the effect it was having. So she interviewed teachers and principals and kids and parents and community members, and she got a very positive response from all of them. And then she was taking a course on the cost effectiveness of social programs, and she thought it would be interesting to see how much it would cost if Food as Elementary was in 130 schools in Baltimore. So she and I worked together and we came up with real dollar figures. We looked at all the costs for the food. The biggest cost was for the food literacy educator and their benefit package, which is a third more than their salary. We looked at gardening tools. We looked at seeds. We looked at soap to wash dishes. So we looked at every real cost. And we came up with a figure of if 13,000 students were taught food as elementary, it would cost approximately $229 per student per year. And then she was an expert on type 2 diabetes, and I said to her it would be really interesting to plug in to the formula that you had for this class on cost effectiveness, how many cases of type 2 diabetes it would be necessary to prevent to be cost effective among those 13,000 students. And this is a very scientific formula, and she plugged in all the numbers and found that if teaching kids about food and nutrition through Food as Elementary were taught to 13,000 students, and it prevented one of those 13,000 from getting type 2 diabetes, it would be cost effective. But we don't think that way in this country. We don't think of long-term prevention. So we really need to start looking at our kids and seeing it's easy to get them excited about these foods. We need to give them the intellectual tools so they can make decisions to prevent these diseases. The average food has traveled 1,500 miles before it reaches our table. And what we're doing to the environment is parallel to what we're doing to our inner physical environment. So I'm going to be talking some about that. This is an argument that I think is very compelling for why we should eat local foods, which is a popular movement right now. David Pimentel is one of those brilliant figures. He was at Cornell, and like Colin Campbell, who I studied with. And Pimentel started out as an entomologist, but then went into agriculture and cost effectiveness of agriculture. And what he did, I think, is very brilliant. He did this way before anybody else was thinking this way. He looked at the real cost of food production. So for an example, iceberg lettuce. If I ate a whole head of iceberg lettuce, it's 95% water, total 110 calories. It's not going to give me much food energy for the day. And I live in a place in the Finger Lakes region of New York that's surrounded by water, so water's not an issue for me as it is in many places. So if I eat a head of iceberg lettuce in upstate New York in the wintertime, where does it come from? California. Do they have a lot of water in California? No. So they have to irrigate it. Now, this is kind of apples and oranges in the comparison, but he looked at the fuel required to irrigate one head of iceberg lettuce. The fuel energy for one head of iceberg lettuce is 750 calories of energy for that one head. To put that one head of iceberg lettuce on a refrigerated truck, drive it to me from California to me in New York, over 4,000 calories of energy to transport it. So look at how much energy just to get me that, to irrigate and bring me that one head of iceberg lettuce that if I ate it, I'd only get 110 calories of energy if I ate it. It doesn't make sense. But we have all these agricultural subsidies that really deflate the true cost of food. So it really is irrational for me to be eating iceberg lettuce in the middle of winter in upstate New York that is coming from California. And this doesn't even consider the figures for plowing the field, harvesting, packaging. This is just looking at two variables, irrigation and transportation. In the U.S., most of the food we eat is processed. And when food is processed, you start with the whole food and you usually take nutrients out and you add chemicals in. I don't know of any example that I can think of when you process a food and it becomes more nutritious. So what we are doing is eating a diet of food that is not full of nutrients. And then 16% of the energy used in food production is to take nutrients out of food, basically, to process it. And 7% of the energy used is for the packaging. So we're doing things that are pretty wasteful in terms of using resources to make the quality less nutritious. Now, here's an example. I teach the kids, I start with basic food safety, and then we go into things like label reading and general nutrition. I'm going to be giving you a number of examples. This is a list of 40 ingredients. On a label, it's listed as one ingredient item on the package. 40 different items. Any idea what it could be? The one item listed on the package. My general rule that I tell kids is if you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. And most of these items are not very pronounceable. Any idea what this could be? Yes? Natural strawberry flavoring. Do you see strawberries and natural strawberry flavoring? This is made in a perfume factory in New Jersey because it smells like strawberries. Perfume factories are good at getting things to smell like real fruits or flowers. And they can use the word natural because there are a couple natural items. There's mint oil, lemon oil. So the label laws are very deceptive. And if you bought something with natural flavoring on the package, what do you think they put in terms of the illustration? Pictures of what? Of these chemicals? No, pictures of strawberries. So any ideas? Here's another slide. This is 50 items. This is artificial strawberry flavoring. 50 items, but at least they call it artificial. Any idea what food product might have both natural and artificial strawberry flavoring? Think of packaging with pictures of strawberries all over it. What's a common food that kids eat for breakfast? They're given it in the breakfast programs often. Pop-Tarts. So Pop-Tarts they can have both natural and artificial strawberry flavoring in them. I bought some to see what else is in them because they had pictures of strawberries all over the cover and no strawberries. There were 0 whole foods, 12 sugars, 35 chemicals in addition to the 90 that are in the natural and artificial flavoring. 3 fats, and they were trans fats, and 18 other ingredients. And by other, I mean things like processed white flour and salt. And salt is a mineral we need, but any processed food, salt is used to preserve it as well as to flavor it. So a staggering 160 ingredients. We are walking chemistry experience. If you got a big cauldron and put all these items into it and looked at the chemical reaction, and yes, it's very minute quantities, they're very tiny quantities in a Pop-Tart. But if you put it together, this hasn't been studied. The combinations of chemicals in foods there are only a few that have been studied, like drugs have been studied in terms of chemical reactions. Is it any wonder our immune systems are breaking down when we have to process as many as 160 ingredients, most of them chemicals, together in one? I don't even want to call it a food. So we really need to let kids at least understand what they're eating when they're eating some of the foods that they've been targeted by advertisers to eat. And then somebody, to me it's counterintuitive to put something with frosting on it into a toaster, which is how you heat them up. So somebody did an experiment to see how long it would take for the Pop-Tart to catch on fire. And it takes about a minute, and they come with warning labels now. Do not let your kid put it in the toaster alone. But you put something with frosting on it in a toaster. Anyway, we have a lot of issues, not just in our country, but around the world. We're going to run out of food if we keep overpopulating and abusing our land, water, and energy by the way we produce food. So we have an ethical obligation to think not just of the United States, where we have a lot of land and resources, but the rest of the world. We're going to run out of food. This quote is from Napoleon, "An army marches on his stomach." It's related to why we have a national school lunch program. Napoleon realized if he didn't feed his soldiers well, they wouldn't be able to perform well. Schooling became mandatory in the United States around 1918, so kids were forced to show up. There was no food in this school. Any teachers in this room? Okay, at least one. Any teacher knows that a hungry child is not ready to learn. So over the course of many years, a number of charitable groups got together and they basically ran soup kitchens within schools. They were always staffed and never had enough money to do it for long term, and they kept lobbying the government. We need to have a national school lunch program. It was after both World War I and then World War II that it was revealed that a third of the young men, and back then it was only men, who tried to enlist in the armed services were rejected due to severe malnutrition. Now their severe malnutrition came from too few calories, too few nutrients. They weren't getting enough to eat. Ironically, today, when young men and women try to enlist in the armed services, the figure is the same. A third are rejected due to severe malnutrition. Their severe malnutrition comes from too few nutrients, too many calories. So we're in a very parallel situation, and it's 18-year-olds should be able to exercise and do basic training, and a third of them who try to enlist can't. The school lunch program is known in the literature as a school feeding program. And what do you think of feeding programs? I think of the top slide more. And basically, when you think of feeding, the way the school lunch program has typically been organized within the school, the kids have very little time to go through the line, very little time to eat. It's getting better, but the schools really need to hear from the parents and realize that there's support to improve the quality of food. They're fed quickly, they're fed high-density foods, and then they go out on the playground. I really believe that the social components of meals is where the art of conversation is developed. And what I have witnessed over the 40-plus years I've been doing this is a lack of manners among kids. They don't know how to carry on a conversation. They don't know how to listen to their elders. And I think the social components of meals is something we really need to pay attention to. and we need to rethink what happens in the middle of the day at schools. Turn it into more of a dining experience rather than a feeding experience. And I think the benefits in terms of behavior would really be great. The USDA, which runs the school meal program, did a study a while ago, and they found that fewer than 2% of the kids in the U.S. meet their requirement for plant-based foods. So there's clearly a problem here. And I don't see the plant-based organizations lobbying the government or present in schools. They don't have the funding. So this is an area where people really need to have more of a voice to make it, to say, look, we all recognize that these foods are beneficial and that kids are not getting enough of them to protect their health. Now here's a slide of 2 typical lunches and the requirements for protein, fruit, vegetable, grain, and milk. So what are the 2 protein foods you see on the trays? Hot dog and some kind of nugget. The fruit, something in corn syrup. Vegetable, French fries, grain, the white bun, and the breading on the nugget counts as a grain, and then milk. Milk is a requirement for the meals as well. When I did my dissertation research many years ago, I did it in the town I live in, Trumansburg, New York, and I took a decibel meter into the cafeteria, and this is another reason why we need to pay attention to the cafeteria feeding versus dining program. So at that time, the decibel meter registered when the kids were having lunch. It's very noisy because it's the first time they get to talk out of turn and they're anxious to get on the playground, but it was over 90 decibels. Recently in New York State, any town you go into, I superimpose this sign, noise limit 90 decibels. So all towns in New York State are in violation of the law if the decibel limit is over 90, yet school cafeterias can be well over 90 decibels. So they're breaking the law, but I don't think they're going to get arrested. So we really need to think of what happens when you eat in a really noisy space, how that affects the way you digest your food. And then a lot of the schools serve food on styrofoam trays, and each tray takes 215 calories of energy to produce. And where do they end up? In the landfill. And it takes plastics between 200 and 500 years to break down in a landfill. So what kind of legacy are we leaving for our future generations? A legacy of lots of plastic. But the good news is the kids are the easy and the fun part. So they all keep journals, and here's just a simple comment. I didn't know how good these foods were until I tried them. The average person in the United States eats the same 10 foods over and over again. We go into the default mode of eating, and we assume that kids are just not going to be adventurous eaters. But the fact is, they're just not being exposed in a positive way to foods, and once you expose them and make it fun, they will eat them. Now my number 1 rule when I start with kids is no yuck rule, and the no yuck rule is we're not going to disrespect the food, and we're not going to disrespect the person who prepared it. You're all going to be making really beautiful, healthy food. You're never going to be forced to eat it, but you must be polite. So when you see something and if you don't want to eat it, you just don't say anything, or you could say, we model behavior. You could say, I really like the colors or the design of that, or you could say, no thank you, but you're not going to say, that's disgusting, I'm not going to eat it. And once they understand that, they feel safe, And they become very adventurous in eating because they see their peers eating. I think school is the ideal place to have this type of program because the peer influence is really powerful, and I've seen it in just about every kind of setting you could imagine. We also have to retrain their palates. I have the students in their journals draw a diagram of the tongue, and we put on the diagram where the sensors are for salty, bitter, all sweet and sour, and they smell the food first with their eyes closed. They close their eyes so they won't be distracted by their neighbor, and they learn that a chef has a chef's nose. You really have to smell the food to taste it more, and then they slowly, with their eyes closed, chew it. I count to 3, and inevitably you hear this because they're really tasting food for the first time. And I really recommend that you try eating that way. Close your eyes, smell your food first, and chew it very slowly. The flavor explodes, and you taste things that you never tasted before because you're really tasting for the first time often. The other thing is the strategy of this curriculum is to ask questions, not give answers. So if I brought in some Brussels sprouts and I said, if you learn to love Brussels sprouts 20 years from now, you might not get cancer. How many kids do you think would want to eat Brussels sprouts? Probably 0. But if you see the picture of the Brussels sprouts, and unfortunately in this picture they have these big wild leaves on the top, and they were cut off already when I got these stalks. But so it's a very unusual looking plant. So I bring it in and say, what do you think this is? And they say, I don't know, it looks like it's from outer space. Well, what do you notice about it? Well, there's a big stalk and there are little green balls on it. Well, what do the little green balls look like? They look kind of like baby cabbages. So then you pass it around and you let each child twist off one of the little Brussels sprouts and hold it in their hand, and they're examining it. And then you ask them to separate the leaves. And they separate the leaves, and the leaves look like delicate little bowls. And then you give them a variety of whole foods to decorate in their bowls. And they really get into it, and they make these beautiful designs, and I guarantee you they will eat them. I did something in Vancouver a number of years ago. I didn't know any of the people there, and they wanted me to do an interactive things with kids. So I said, and it was fall, so I said, can you get Brussels sprouts? And they said, you're going to do something with kids and Brussels sprouts? Are you crazy? And I said, listen, it's my reputation. Just if you can get them, let me know. And this one kid came up to the stage, grabbed the microphone, and he said, I'm here because I hate vegetables and nobody's ever going to get me to eat any of them. And I said, that's your choice. I hope you have fun doing this experiment. And he got so into decorating his little bowl that at the end, he grabbed the microphone back and he said, I still hate vegetables, but I love raw Brussels sprouts. So, that kind of thing, it really does happen, and that's why I urge you to get it in schools here, because you can hear me tell these stories and people sometimes think, oh, she must be exaggerating. Believe me, I'm not. I want you to really be able to see it for yourself. And here's another comment. In the beginning of the school year, candy is all I thought about, and that I wanted foreign foods for supper, like tzatziki, Three Sister casserole, Greek rice pudding, and pasta primavera. So in terms of vocabulary, I monitor all the new words that they learn. The kids become real foodies. They become very sophisticated in terms of their palates and their vocabulary about food. And this is also based on the type of learning that Maria Montessori espoused many years ago. And here's another quote. I really loved your tofu. It made me get hooked on it. It made my cheeks tingle. The only thing I think about is tofu. When I'm bored, I think of tofu. So the kids really come up with really interesting observations. And here's how I teach vitamins. Basically, what the key things the average person needs to know about vitamins is why do you need them and how do you get them. So in their journals, they write on one page vitamin A, and under that they make A's the color of whole foods that are good sources of vitamin A. So a yellow, orange, red, green, purple A, and under that we brainstorm about whole foods that are those colors. So they draw pictures of them, they taste them, and they're getting exposed to eating more foods, and we go through all the vitamins like that, and it really does stick with them. They remember. Then we talk about, well, why do you need vitamin A? And they draw pictures of their eyes, hair, skin, and teeth. And the more you repeat that, which is a Montessori type of approach to education, repetition, the more you remember. And these kids really retain it, and they look at foods for color and they think of their eyes. So it really sticks with them. It's been very effective in getting them to understand the relationship between color of whole foods and their health. And who wouldn't think this was beautiful? Every museum of the world has still lifes of food because it's very visually appealing, and we stress the aesthetics of the presentation over and over again, and the kids are masterful at doing artistic presentations with food. So eat for color, basic message. Then the other thing that we've done a lot of is paint murals in cafeterias, work with local artists where the kids design murals so visual learners will see every day, and this is a vitamin lesson, what they learned in the classroom, and they won't have to memorize it. They'll just see it when they eat in the cafeteria every single day. And the kids learn about cultures of the world, and they get to make foods in an authentic way. It's not using tools that are not authentic. Whenever possible, we try to get people from the culture in and teach them the traditional way of making these foods. They're very proud to do that. They love eating with chopsticks. They learn about the culture. They learn that in most of the United States, the way we eat is not the norm, because more people eat with chopsticks or their hands than with a fork, knife, and spoon. So it puts it in perspective that the United States is not the center of the universe, that there are other ways of doing it. And they experience that in the classroom by learning about the cultures and how they treat food, which is something huge. It's something we all have to do every day, no matter where we live. So another thing, just to give you an example of a safety lesson, which we start out with, one of the most important things is to have clean hands before handling food, especially in a classroom. So I tried to make this a sensory experience too. And I'm going to ask you guys just to do something very quickly, and you're going to think I'm crazy when I first ask you to do it. But most kids know that they need to wash their hands before they handle food. And they know why. They know about germs. So then I ask them, and I want you to smell your hands. Now, how many of you would feel comfortable with your hands as they are now handling food? Some of you. Okay, now I want you to smell your neighbor's hands. I only see a couple of you doing that. The point is, if you're not willing to smell your neighbor's hands, then think of how many sets of hands have handled your food before you eat it. And the idea of just smelling to see if it smells clean, you can do it for yourself often, but for your neighbor, you have no idea where their hands have been. But this is another issue of respect, and the kids really get it. Like, I'm going to respect you by having really clean hands before I touch food that you're going to eat, which will become part of your body. And I expect you to do the same for me. Then we do this experiment. There's a lotion that glows in the dark. So I have put some of the lotion on the kids' hands, they rub it in, then they go wash their hands. So supposedly their hands are clean. Then we go in a dark space, turn all the lights out, shine a black light on, and the lotion glows in the dark, so it shows where the lotion remains. And those are the areas that you really need to concentrate when you wash your hands, usually fingernails and in between the fingers. So they see that you think your hands are clean and they're not really. And kids love glow-in-the-dark things and the gore aspect of it. But it really does stick with them that we need to be very careful about washing our hands because we don't want to transmit disease. And they do that once and they really do remember it. We have these open house meals where the kids prepare these beautiful meals for the public, and usually there's music from a culture, there's dance, and they cook, they set up, they decorate, they clean up, so they're learning really important life skills. It's a lot of work, but it really is community building, and it's great for the kids to have that experience. Here's when I was in Hawaii before. It's a couple slides working with the language immersion schools, and you can see making poi the traditional way and working in the taro field. In this slide I put in to show that you can compare traditional crops that are grown in different regions and cooked in completely different ways in different parts of the world. So there are endless things you can do with food in the classroom and in the garden. This was in Miami, a program with Florida International students. And this was at a school for teenage boys who were incarcerated that I did in Miami quite a number of years ago. I was invited to set up a program with the cooks to try to improve the quality of the meals, because basically the young men were incarcerated and they were eating institutional food, which was a pretty low quality. So I started working with the cooks, and then I started working with the students, and they were very receptive to learning this, and they had no idea what plant-based or organic or any of that meant, but they were really curious. And I asked the administration if I could do a study before I left Miami, and they agreed. And so 20 of these students signed on to go plant-based for 3 weeks. And it was an ideal place to do research because they had no freedom. They were stuck there, and they had no money. They could only eat the food that was given to them. So, fortunately, Miami Children's Hospital did blood work on them before the 3-week experiment started, and then after, and it was really quite amazing what happened. Everything improved dramatically, way more than anybody thought. Their cholesterols went down. I mean, they just became different people. Their attitudes especially, they went from being really angry to being different people in 3 short weeks. And one of them was invited to give a guest lecture at T. Colin Campbell's nutrition class before he quit teaching it. So he flew up and he told the students at Cornell nutrition class, I grew up in the streets of Miami. I was in a gang when I was in elementary school, and I thought I'd spend the rest of my life trying to dodge the police and stay out of jail. If you told me that food had anything to do with my anger, I never would have believed a word you said, until I did this experiment on myself. And now I know that a lot of my agitation was because of what I was eating. My cells were agitated. So now I want to go back to my former gang and say, forget about armed robbery, food's where it's at. So, coming from somebody who's been there rather than somebody like me is really powerful. And we had a celebration right before I left, and they cooked this beautiful feast and invited people from the community, including from Johnson & Wales, which is a culinary college. And a number of these students were given full scholarships to Johnson & Wales. And the student who lectured in Colin's class was one of those students, and he came in his chef's whites and lectured the Cornell students. And he was the first one in his family to go to college and graduated high school, and his whole family changed what they ate because of him. So food can be a very easy solution if people will allow studies like this to happen. But it can't be judgmental, and that's a really important message. If you go in saying, thou must eat this way, it's like trying to force your religion on people. So the approach has got to be, I'm just here to make it fun and just let you see what is possible in terms of delicious new tastes, instead of thou must eat this way or else. And I take great pride in not having been kicked out of schools, because it's really more powerful when kids who have never heard the word plant-based or organic suddenly become advocates on it, not because you coerce them, but because they want to, because they know it's real, because they've done experiments on themselves. This is my most important slide. Nutrition begins with healthy soil. Whatever we grow in soil can only take up what nutrients is in that soil. So you can have an organic tomato that's growing on nutrient-dense, nutrient-poor soil, and it's not going to have all the minerals in it that you need. So giving back to the soil is critically important to our health and the health of the planet. It takes approximately 500 years to replace 1 inch of topsoil. So we really need to pay attention to how we're treating our soil. And it takes about 1 acre of land to produce food for the year for each child, and up to a third less if it's vegetarian or vegan. So thinking of land use and how we produce enough food to feed the planet, not just the United States, we need to start putting these figures in front of people so we can start planning for the future. These are kids in Baltimore growing food for their food literacy program. And these are kids in New York City. These are earth boxes, and they're on a rooftop, and they're growing a crop of corn. So you can garden even if you don't have space by using things like earth boxes. There are lots of methods now that weren't available even 10 years ago. This is the school garden in Trumansburg, where I live, and the kids plant beautiful flowers and veggies, and we have an outdoor classroom, and they just love going out there. They need to be in nature. This is the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash from Native American culture. The corn acts as the stake, the beans swirl around it, grow up it, and the squash shades the weeds and keeps the insects out. So learning about traditional agriculture from different cultures is really exciting for the kids to learn about. And these 2 pillars on the 2 sides of the Three Sisters are in a basement in New York City. The kids painted them just to liven up the basement cafeteria and learn about the Three Sisters. So there's so much that can be done. Here's another quote. I've changed my favorite food from candy to broccoli. And I think our class was very lucky that Antonia came to our school and we were not in the control group. So learning basic science, if you're doing a study, the kids who are having the food experiences, they are having so much fun. All the kids want to do it. And this kid is from Hawaii, by the way. It's from the Maui, 1998. So I remember that quite well. Food is a great way to teach kids to care for and appreciate others. One of the things I noticed in Miami with those teenage boys, once they got this knowledge, they wanted to give back. The school lets the kids go home on a weekend if they're about to be released. Unfortunately, some of them were not released at all, but they want to transition them. And this one kid said, "I'm going to go home. I'm really anxious." And I said, "Well, because you're worried you're going to go to McDonald's?" I said, "Just be honest about it, because, I don't care. I mean, I do care, but tell me the truth. I don't want you to screw up this study if you do, and I won't judge you if you do. And he said, no, it's not that. My grandmother has cancer, and I want all of her recipes because I want to spend the weekend filling up the freezer because I know it can help her cancer. And I saw that over and over again, that when somebody knows this knowledge, they want to share it with their loved ones. They want to make it better. And kids do that too. It's really heartwarming to see. And our sense of memory is most connected with our sense of smell. And we really need to create as many positive messages about food with kids. Here's some self-portraits. They all do self-portraits. And you learn so much from this program. You can go home and instead of saying nothing when your parents say, what did you do in school today? You can blow their minds about this program. So another quote, well, this is from the woman who founded the home economics program, Ellen Richards, who is a real hero of mine. What she did in the late 1800s was study chemistry, and she was the first woman to study at MIT and graduate from MIT, and her whole agenda was to apply chemistry to air, water, and food quality. She coined the word ecology. She's somebody we all should know about, and I only ran across her name when I was doing a history of the school lunch program. It was through accident. And here I was at Cornell getting a PhD in the School of Human Ecology, which would not exist if it hadn't been for the pioneering work of this woman. What happened with home economics over the years is it became so watered down from the real message that people lost interest. But I try to promote this name whenever possible because I think everybody, we owe her a tremendous thanks in what she did to clean up our air, water, and food at great price. And here's another quote. And last but not least, we can teach each other about how important it is to eat healthy. When we learn about healthy food, then we can go home and teach others about food. If we teach our family and friends, then that knowledge will get passed down to every person, and someday we can have a very healthy world. Isn't that what we want? So the kids, they get it. The problems are really not the kids. Then I have one more slide to show you, and I welcome any questions or comments you may have. How did we get from Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine, to thinking when we have some sort of catastrophic problem and we're on a feeding tube, as this young man, John, was, our need is for corn syrup and chemicals. So I'm going to briefly tell you this story about John and his mother, Jean. About 8 years ago, I got a call from Jean, who I did not know, who lived in my town, and she said her son fell off a moving truck his last day of high school and had catastrophic brain injury. Part of his brain was literally on the pavement, and he was given no hope for survival. And he had been kept alive with a feeding tube that was based on corn syrup. The formula was based on corn syrup and chemicals, and went in his stomach, and he had all sorts of complications. And Jean, the mom, thought, there's got to be another way to feed him. I recognize that they all say he's brain dead and he's not going to come back, but I just can't stand putting this stuff in his feeding tube. And since he was chronic, she did a lot of his daily care. For 2 years, this happened. He had one near-death experience after another, and it was really tragic. So finally, the physician said he needs to go to hospice, and you need to get on with your life. This is way too long. And she came to me because she was trying to find someone who knew about nutrition who would create a formula with real food in it to put in the feeding tube. And she said, he's been given no hope, but I can't stand having this chemical formula go in his feeding tube. Will you work with me? And I said, yes. I have kids, and I wouldn't want that to go in their body if I had the same situation that you do. So when he was sent to hospice after 2 years of being in a coma and being fed this formula, we were allowed to put the soup that I made in his feeding tube. The mom had to sign a disclaimer saying if the soup killed him, she would not sue the doctors, which she did. And so I made this soup, and it was based on whole plant foods. I ground it up in a Vitamix and said we need to go really slow at first because it's been 2 years since he's had real food, and real food takes a lot of energy to digest. So he was getting 9 cups of the formula every 24 hours, and I said, let's give him 1 cup of my soup the first week, increase it to 2 if he seems to be handling it, and see how it goes. Well, when he was less than half formula, half soup, still mainly formula, he woke up for the first time in 2 years. And the hospice nurses would ask him questions. John, blink once, because his muscles had all atrophied. And they said, blink once for yes, 2 for no. And they'd ask him questions, and he'd get it right every time. So then they brought the physicians in, and the physicians examined him. And they said, oh my God, he's got cognition. We need to get him in rehab. So he went to rehab from a hospice, spent time there. Took a while. He was on my soup for a full year before he learned to eat again and swallow. I'm very proud to say that my nonprofit hosted a conference, I think about 5 years ago at Johns Hopkins, and John was one of the keynote speakers. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place. Colin Campbell and Esselstyn and some of our heroes were all there, and they know the story well. And he's now graduated from a 2-year college, and he's working at a fitness center. He still needs to use a wheelchair sometimes, but he's learning to walk, and he can walk on his own, but not for long distances. That's the last thing that's coming back. But the point is, and the doctors weren't trying to do anything evil. It's what they've been taught and what the protocol is. My question is, how did we get from thinking the food was our medicine to thinking sterilized corn syrup and chemicals will heal damaged cells? So I want to leave you with that question, and I want to also ask you to please consider developing, I would love so much more than anything to have Hawaii become the first state where food literacy was in all the schools. So if you want to work with me on that, and that's going to require getting funding together, I would love to do it. So thank you very much. The question was, you have this great program, the kids get excited, then they go home to their parents, and the parents haven't been educated in this way. And that's a really excellent question. One of the things I have a number of answers for it. One of the things that I have documented over and over again, the best way to reach the parents is through the kids. You get the kids turned on about eating healthy foods. They go home wanting to cook dinner for their families. The parents pay attention, especially if the kids are young. The kids go home and make dips for their mothers for Mother's Day, and things like that. That's part of the program to try to reach the parents. But we also have parent education as part of it, where we try to educate the parents and the teachers, because the adults usually are so confused about nutrition that they don't know where to go. So if you can have fun classes for the parents and teachers and other adults to try to get them all on the same page, that really works. It all depends on how much time you have, how much time the school's willing to give you to set up these things, and how much funding you have.
Thank you, Dr. Antonia Demas, for this wonderfully inspiring and encouraging presentation. So thank you all for coming. Mahalo, and have a safe return home. Good night, everyone.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet.